Which war or wars did you serve in?
Both World War II, and that one I was active in combat. During the Korean conflict, which came later, of course, I was recalled to service, and I served that time at Fort Benning, Georgia as an instructor.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I was drafted while I was still in high school. I got to finish high school, but I immediately left for the Army.
What branch did you join and why?
Well, I was drafted into the Army, so there wasn't really any why. I was there.
Where were you stationed?
Well, I did my basic in Fort Roberts in Arkansas, Camp Roberts in Arkansas, and from there I went immediately overseas in the Pacific.
What were your responsibilities in the service?
Well, during combat I was a rifleman. I did carry the Browning automatic rifle, and also at times I was responsible for carrying our company's flamethrower. They don't use those much anymore, but I did carry that for a while until I was wounded, and then I wound up in the hospital for a while.
Would you mind explaining that? What happened when you were wounded?
Well, the first time I was wounded was not very bad, but they did give me a Purple Heart. We had a lot of rain in the Pacific on Okinawa where I was, and at one time it rained so much that the war really came to a standstill. Both sides couldn't move much. We used to kid and say, somebody from our foxhole, is that your blanket floating down the hill down there? Because our foxhole was filled with water. But we had 2 men to a foxhole. We dug a new one. It was halfway dry. The rain had stopped a little bit. And we weren't in it one evening very long when it started to rain good again. And we heard a few shells, but I said I wanted to close the front flap on the tent so we would keep the rain off our blankets because it was open. And I decided to set up, which would make me a waist above the ground level, to close those tent flaps. And with that, a shell landed right in front of the tent. The good Lord was with me. There I sat. The tent was gone, and I just had a little bit of shrapnel in me.
Wow. Did you see or involve yourself in combat, and what was that like?
What was that?
Did you see or involve yourself in combat, and what was that like?
Yeah, we were in combat during that time there, and then later on, after this, we didn't get into action again, and after another week or so of action, I was shot in the leg, and that's when I was taken out of Okinawa and sent to a hospital on Saipan, on Guam, I beg your pardon, on Guam. And I recuperated there.
How long did that take, and did you go straight back?
I don't recall quite how long I was there, about 2 weeks, I think. And then I was sent back to my unit on Okinawa. And shortly after that, the war ended. That's when Harry Truman dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima.
What was your most memorable experience from the war?
That might be strange, not talking about the fighting, I don't want to get into that and all that, but the thing I remember a lot about it, when it rained so much, I went 11 days without taking my shoes or socks off because it rained so much, and we couldn't really eat because it was pouring down rain. They'd bring us some food once in a while and be soaking wet. That part I remember, especially. And I remember one time we were filling up our canteens out of a flowing stream near where we were embedded. And about the time we filled our canteens, one of our friends came downhill and said, by the way, there's a dead Japanese laying in the water up above. So we had to dump the water out. We didn't want it anymore. Those are some of the things in combat I remember.
Okay, do you remember any rules or laws that civilians had to follow during the war in the U.S.?
Say that again?
Do you remember any laws or rules that civilians had to follow during the war?
Oh, there were a lot of them, of course, when you're in the military, but none of them were hard to follow, I don't think, if you're trained right.
Were you a part of Pearl Harbor Day, VE Day, or VJ?
Oh, no, that came before my time.
What were the food, hygiene, and living conditions like when you were overseas?
When I was overseas, well, in combat, it was, I guess I would describe it this way, like if you wanted to go out on a rainy week and camp out for a while and keep your head down because everybody's shooting at you, that's about the way it was. There were no latrines or anything. You found a boy tree, if you know what I mean.
When and why did you leave the war?
Well, when the World War II in Pacific was over, I was discharged, but then I elected to stay in the reserve. So it was over, then we were shipped home, and after 2.5 years I came home.
What was the first thing that you did when you got home?
Hugged my mother and my dad. And then, of course, called my old girlfriend, who had by that time became engaged to a Navy man, so that ended that relationship.
Were you in contact with your parents or her at the time?
Well, in those days, we wrote letters back and forth. That was before internet or anything, and we had the, I forget what to call it. Certain letters was on very thin tissue paper, and it folded up and made its own envelope, and that's what we mailed back and forth. It took maybe 2 or 3 weeks to get home, and the letters from them would take 2 or 3 weeks to catch up with us.